meeting over to Lorraine so she can introduce our guest speaker. And it's great to be with everybody. We're really looking forward to this week with today's content and Thursday's content. Today, Elliot will be talking a little bit about the economy, about where things will be going down the road. And then on Thursday, we'll be talking about how to leverage that in our practice. So really great to be with everybody and really looking forward to this. And thank you so much, Elliot, for being here.
Thank you, Chris, for the invitation. Thank you, Team Masiello. Thank you.
So I'm very happy to introduce Elliot Eisenberg. I've known Elliot for many years. I've had the pleasure of hearing him present on local and national platforms. He's incredible. You guys are going to love today's session. Elliot is an internationally acclaimed economist and public speaker. He specializes, as you're about to see, in making economics fun, relevant, and educational. His energy is like nobody I've ever seen. So I really think you're going to enjoy today. He's a former senior economist with National, easy for me to say, National Association of Home Builders. He's the creator of a multifamily stock index, author of nearly 100 articles. He's a regular consultant to large real estate professional associations. He's spoken to hundreds of business groups and associations. He publishes a daily 70-word blog on the economy, which I encourage everybody to sign up for. It's always relevant and it's always very thoughtful. So Elliot, I thank you so much for joining us today. And so everyone knows we will be recording this session, and because there's going to be a lot that you'll be hearing about, and you're going to want to refer back to it later. So don't worry about feverishly trying to take notes or anything. We will have the recording. We'll release it at the end of the day. And I will turn it over to Elliot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here. My gosh, let me share my screen and begin talking about stuff here. Which not sure. I think it's this one I want to share. And we'll go like that. And I think we'll be good to go. Are we good to go? Is it working?
Good to go, but we don't see your screen.
You don't? What do you see?
We see you.
You see me, but no slides.
Right.
Oh, that's inconvenient. Let's try again then. Let's try and do it this way. How about now?
Now we see.
You see both? You see both? It's good?
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to begin. Let's start. I mean, there's so much to talk about. It's crazy. The first slide is we'll talk about we'll see let's look at GDP. What does GDP look like? GDP is composed of four terms: C, household consumption; I, corporate investment; G, government spending; and net exports, or exports minus imports, X minus M. Prior to the onset of the recession, I wasn't going anywhere, corporate investment wasn't going anywhere, government spending wasn't going anywhere, and exports weren't going anywhere for a bunch of reasons. All we had was C. And what happens? We lock ourselves in our houses and C goes like that. And miraculously, we have a recession. That's the nuts and bolts of it. And the question now becomes, how fast do we get out? When do we get out? And what does the recovery look like? And there's good news and there's bad news. There's a lot of both. So let's look at both of them and let's see where we're going. So if you look at data, a lot of the data now looks like this, where you see this tremendous decline followed by the up. And you'll see this in a half a dozen slides that I show you. So there's no question, it's beyond doubt that we're recovering now. This recession began in March. It lasted March, April, and maybe May, maybe June, and then we're done. That's it. This is the shortest recession in US history, as short as 2 months, maybe as long as 4. This is by far the shortest recession we've ever had in history. However, it's also the deepest. That's the problem. It's incredibly deep. I mean, look at this graph right here. You can see the decline from peak to trough in the last 2 months has been deeper than the decline we experienced back in 07, 08. Back in 07, 08, on this graph, you see it was about 50 and it fell to 25, the decline of 25 points. Here it went from 65 to 35, the decline of 30 points. You'll see some cases more, some cases less. But in every case, you're going to see the decline being absolutely precipitous. It's like one of those Bugs Bunny cartoons where the coyote goes too far, looks down and collapses and goes straight down. Like you're holding an anvil. That's how fast our economy is declining. Short, but profound. Here's another slide. So we'll look at a couple other slides along the same lines here, and they're all going to show us the same story. Here's retail sales. What do we see? This massive decline and then an improvement. It just goes on and on and on. This is credit card activity, massive decline and then an improvement. So we're in the improvement stage now. I mean, today the stock market, on Friday, the stock market was upset about potential recurring of coronavirus. That's a huge, huge, huge deal. I don't know why it took the Wall Street guys so long to realize this could happen, but they're a bunch of optimistic idiots, I think, in my opinion. But nonetheless, we are recovering. The question is now how fast, and we'll talk about that quite a lot. You can see here in auto sales, a perfect example. And this begins to get into the land of housing, because you finance a car, and the car is the second most expensive thing you buy behind a house. So how auto sales go is often very correlated with how housing sales go. They're not exactly correlated, but they're highly correlated. You can see here in this graph, tremendous decline. Auto sales went from roughly 17 million a year down to about 8.5 million or 8 million a year. I mean, an incredible decline, a deeper decline than we had in the Great Recession. And now, but this quick recovery up. There's pent-up demand from folks who didn't buy cars in March and April. People need new cars and so on and so forth, right? So car sales are improving quite a lot. There's also 0% financing, which doesn't exist in the world of housing. But to see autos improve so much, this is a hint of how housing is doing. But housing is doing even better than auto sales. It didn't decline nearly as much. But you see across the board, here's another good piece of data. This is put out by the New York Fed or the Dallas Fed. It's a New York economist, the New York Fed economist, the Dallas Fed economist, and a Harvard guy. They put this together pretty quickly. It looks at data that comes due daily or weekly. And you can see it went right down, and now it's sort of bottomed and is sort of beginning its way up. Is it good? No. Is it better? Yes. Will it be better next month? Yes. This is current data. This is at most a week-old data. But the other data I showed you earlier on credit cards and consumer sales, they're going to continue to improve as we open up. So this is inherently good news. There's no question things are going to get better. And if you look here at this is last month's data. We don't have this month's data yet. So this is still April data. We'll get May data at the end of June. So this data is relatively old, but you can see this precipitous decline in consumer spending. This is 70% of GDP. This is why everybody thinks the month of April, the GDP in Q2, which we're in right now, almost the end of it, thank God, is going to be utterly horrendous. Because household spending in this graph, as you can see, has declined incredibly deeply, much more deeply than it did in the Great Recession, which on this graph is on the center left, right? There it declined 2-3%, and we had a nice recession that was 3 or 4 or 5% of GDP. Here we see a decline of 25 or 26%, meaning Q2 GDP. Now, of course, May and June will be better, but April's just horrendous, meaning we may well have GDP decline this quarter of 35, 36% annualized rate. Annualized rate, you got to divide it by 4 to get the quarterly rate. So if it's 40%, that means GDP declined literally by 10 percentage points in Q2. 10 percentage points is over 4 years of economic growth. That means GDP will turn from where it was in 2020 down to where it was in 2016 in 3 months. We've lost 4 to 5 years of economic growth. This is just a calamity economically, but the recovery should be pretty decent, assuming 3 or 4 things that we'll talk about don't come to pass, including the return of the coronavirus. This is really important, right? I can't stress this enough. Now, in terms of in terms of the second term in GDP, corporate investment in plant and equipment, it's going to improve clearly, but you're not going to see firms investing in plant. You're not going to see firms buying tons of equipment. They may buy equipment to get rid of workers to have machines that don't get coronavirus, but they're not going to be building a lot. You maybe see some inventories at first, maybe some software and some computers next, and building plant is going to be the last thing firms do. And that's going to depress GDP growth. GDP growth in the short run is going to be entirely determined by consumer spending and how optimistic we are, how good we feel, how much the government sends us in checks, which is an important second thing that has to continue happening. You may not like it, but we have to have it go on. If you look at small business sentiment, as you see in this graph, it went way down, came back up. The decline hasn't been all that big, and it's already recovering because businesses are thinking things are going to get better in the future. Currently, they're not so happy, but everyone has expectations of tomorrow that are better than they are today. And that's a reasonable thing to expect as we open up, right? Assuming, again, no coronavirus. It's a big if. If we look at manufacturing activity in this graph, same sort of graph, this down and then an up. you look at the three different colors, there's blue, there's yellow, and there's red. They all look at very similar things. They're not fundamentally different. It's slightly different measures and how you measure it and what exactly you look at, but the trend is the same, right? And these data come out in the middle of the month, so we're soon going to start getting the May data. So this is pretty good. This is May. We're going to get June data pretty soon. This is pretty good data, so we're going to improve it. What's it going to look like? We'll get there in a couple of seconds. This is intermodal rail traffic. It's starting to recover too. So what's intermodal rail? Intermodal rail is people putting stuff into corrugated metal containers. So you're not putting corn or wheat or soybeans or coal. That's not going in those. Those are going into big trains, into big ships, right? Or trains that then deposit it into a ship. This is manufactured goods. So even manufacturing starting to turn around. It's weak. 2018 was the best year ever. 19 was weaker because the dollar was strong. Trade wars. 2020 was weaker, but it's starting to turn around too. So there's lots of good news here. The question is how much good news and what kind of good news, right? Now, there's also continuing bad news. This is a good example of it. Corporations, they're pulling back on their dividends. Some are stopping their dividends entirely in black. It's the biggest decline in firms pulling their dividends entirely since even before 2008. This is in 20 years the worst we've had. And a number of firms in orange or pink, whatever color that is, have reduced the size of their dividends. And that's not the biggest in the last 20 years, but it's the second or third biggest in 20 years. So firms are pulling back. They're holding on to their cash. They're pulling their lines of credit with banks. They're not investing in equipment. They're not investing in plant right now. They are singularly concerned about staying alive, opening their doors as soon as they can, and hopefully having customers return. Restaurants and all these service motels and hotels, and sporting teams, and so on and so forth. This is where the pain is most acute. And there's not going to be a lot of investment in plant and equipment going on. And here's another reason why. Factory utilization rates are low. Why on earth would you invest in plant and equipment when you have tremendous excess capacity in your facility already? This doesn't make sense. You know, in 6 or 8 months, it's a different story. But in the short run, consumer spending is what's going to drive us. We've all got to go out, damn coronavirus, I'm joking, and spend ourselves into oblivion. I'm kidding, but you get my point. Now, that's second term. So I is not going to be our savior here. Household consumption is going to be driving it, but so is government spending. And this is critical. This recession hit incredibly fast and incredibly hard, drove unemployment up incredibly high. And what did government do? Government came through and said, we're going to help you out. This is the first big government package that came through. It was $2.2 or $2.3 trillion. And the PPP money, the Paycheck Protection Program money, ran out fast. So what did Congress do? Congress said, okay, let's come through with $500 billion more. So Congress has come through with a ballpark of 2.7 or $2.8 trillion. This is a huge, huge, huge amount of money. The problem is it isn't enough. We're going to need more because unemployment is ridiculously high right now. It's still 16.5%. It was 19.8 or 19.7 in April, went down to 16.6, a nice noticeable 3 percentage point decline. Great news, the stock market was thrilled, but we're hardly out of the woods. Unemployment peaked at 10% in 2009. We're 6.5 percentage points higher than that. And that doesn't include the millions who are unemployed who are getting now special money for gig workers and Uber type workers who aren't working. So there's a huge percentage, and we'll go into detail on that. But this is the second critical thing. You don't want an occurrence of COVID-19 in the fall, right? Or even now as we open up, which we're experiencing a little bit of, and we need government to continue giving us money in some shape, way, or form because unemployment is going to be too high for the foreseeable future to get consumer spending really doing well. So if they don't do it, it will be a fundamental mistake. So the question is, when do they give it? How much do they give? They have to give it to us relatively soon because end of July, the extra money in unemployment, the extra $600 a week goes away. That's helped spending tremendously. It's helped households pay their rent, pay their mortgage, pay their credit card bills, pay their car payments, and so on and so forth. If that money stops and the economy hasn't improved enough, you got a ditch that we're going to go into at some point. Now, we can argue that $600 a week is discouraging people from working. Yeah, fine, I get that. But we've got to do something. Maybe lower it down to 400 or 300. Maybe encourage folks to go find jobs or something. But we're going to have to do something to bridge us because unemployment is still really, really high. So point two, we need more money from the government. And the government's going to provide. They're going to figure out something that they can all do, right? Now, deficit, it's going to get much worse. There's no question about it. No ands, ifs, or buts about it. Deficit's going to end up this year somewhere between 15 and 20, probably closer to 20. This graph shows 16. Yeah, no one knows exactly. It's going to go away. Am I nervous about this? In the short run, not at all. We have no choice. Monetary policy was already weakened because interest rates were already very low before the recession began. When the recession began back in early March, interest rates were at 1.5%. The Fed cut them by half a point in early March, and in late March cut them by a whole percentage point, and they're now at 0. They can't go any lower. Last recession in 2008, the central bank interest rates were at 5% before the recession began. They had a lot more rate cuts to do before they had to go into QE and all that kind of stuff. Now they cut the rates, they're in QE. They brought back their playbook from 2008-9. They're opening up all kinds of facilities and swap lines, and they're lending to states and governments and counties and all kinds of stuff, doing everything they can to help the government, to help the economy go forward. And the government's done a good job here. They really have. I'm not a huge fan of government at a personal level, but I give them really high grades for moving very fast and very well, given the dire situation and the speed of the legislation that was passed. They get it worse to B+, and that's for Congress like an exceptionally high grade. I don't fault them for the mistakes that happened. Now, the last thing is exports minus imports. We kind of forget about that because we've got all this COVID-19 thing going on. But it's also hurting GDP, and that's another source of problems. President Trump has continued to make noises about fighting with China and imposing tariffs, new trade wars, and whatever. And look, I get why he's angry. I get why he imposed the tariffs in the past. But now is not the time to add more. We have too much on our plate economically. We don't want to discourage investments, corporate spending, household spending, and Wall Street fear. We want to do everything we can to nurture the economy to get it healthy. You want to fight China, do it in a year. Or do it a year or two ago, which he did, fine, good, but just don't do it now. So that's the third thing. We don't want a return of coronavirus. We don't want a trade war. We want Congress to give us more money in some shape, way, or form, and we can argue how, right? So now, what's the recession going to look like? How deep is it going to be? What's the shape of the recovery? So this graph here shows you, bar chart, shows you all the recessions the U.S. has had since, I think, before the Civil War, 1858, so just before the Civil War. And I put arrows over two of them in particular. One, the recent one that was very short in 82 or 81 or whenever it was, that was a very short recession, 6 months. And the one before that, the one in the middle of the graph, was 7 months. Those are the two shortest recessions the U.S. has experienced since 1900, since the beginning of the graph, so prior to Civil War. The earlier one, the one in 1920, is interesting because that one came immediately after the Spanish influenza epidemic of 1918 that killed, I don't know, 700,000 Americans. I mean, this was a huge catastrophe. The population of the U.S. was much smaller back then. And it was very short, 7 months. And it was followed by, guess what? A depression. A depression that was steep, of course, depression. But it was called the Forgotten Depression. Why? Because it led into the Roaring 20s. Now, the Roaring 20s end badly. I get it. Don't think of that. That's a whole separate issue of why it went bad. There was bad policy, bad regulations, and then terrible decisions made in the recession itself that started in 29. There was monetary policy mistakes, massive, and fiscal policy mistakes that were massive. And they prolonged it for no good reason. But that's a whole separate thing. But it was short, and it led to a good recovery. We're not going to have a recovery that good this time. Our economy is not young demographically. We're not so young. But there's no reason why we can't have a decent recovery. And this is, I've already told you, it may be 2 months, 3 months, or at most a 4-month recession. So the recession's just about, end of this month is the longest the recession can possibly last. March, April, May, June, we're done. Now, what's the recovery going to look like? So I think the recovery is going to look, here's an example of what we think the recovery will look like. This is a consensus of economists. You can see Q1 drop by about 5% annualized basis. So in that particular quarter, Q1, GDP really fell by 1.25%, or a quarter of the 5. In Q2, the expectation is somewhere worse than 30, maybe 35%. So we get a 12% decline, real 12% decline in GDP. But you can see Q3 and Q4 are pretty good quarters, and then it slowly peters out. Growth returns to trend because that's all you got. You have your factories, you have people, you have their education levels and their labor force participation numbers. There's no magic here. We can't magically produce more GDP. In the short run, through spending, government spending, we can push it up, but then it goes back down again, right? We can't sustain that, right? And our economy prior to the onset of the recession was growing at about 2%, and that's what our long-term growth will be. But in the next year or so, it will come down to that from maybe 6 or 7 or 8 or 9, maybe even 10 or 12 for one quarter. And then it goes down to 2 eventually. By the end of this year, with a little bit of luck, GDP is just 6% below what it was when the year started. 6 percentage points. If we have 3% growth for 2 years, which is a little bit above trend, by the end of 22, we're back where we started. This is a deepest hole we're in, and it will take us a good long time to get out. The recovery process will be check mark shaped. It's steep decline followed by a slow and steady improvement. Some folks have called it a swoosh recovery in honor of Nike. I don't think Nike deserves any credit. They're not much in the world of economics, but I think check mark is a more appropriate term. I still believe it's a check mark, even after the good unemployment numbers that came out last week. I do not see it be anywhere except in a couple sectors. I think housing is one of them. So we'll get there in a couple of seconds, but we're not there yet. Let's now change our focus and talk about labor markets. And labor markets have done a complete 180 to the negative, unfortunately. This is first-time claims for unemployment. Prior to the onset of this recession, the numbers that you see in this graph that are 6 million and then wind their way down to 1.5 as of last week, the prior all-time high in this number was like 670,000 in 1982 in one of those recessions back, the double-dip recessions early in the Reagan presidency in his first term. And now we have numbers that are almost 10 times higher. And even now, 10 weeks later, it's still at 1.5 million. That's still well over double its historic all-time high. This is still a labor market that's in profound decline and in turmoil. But this paints a picture that's worse than it really is. Because when you lose your job, and this graph shows you when you go from employment to unemployment, you go to the unemployment office, you fill out forms online or whatever, and now you are a first-time claimant for unemployment. You've lost your job. But everybody who loses a job doesn't remain unemployed perpetually. They look for work or they drop out of the labor force. And I want us to focus more on the upcoming slide because this tells us how many people aren't working, not how many people are losing their jobs. Because every month people are getting hired. Even in a pandemic like this, there's still employment growth, right? So if you look at the second graph, this tells you what's the stock of people, the number of people in total that are collecting unemployment insurance or qualifying for unemployment insurance. And what you see here is the number goes up and peaks out. It goes up to 24 million. And then it comes down to about 20 or 21. And it's been bouncing around there now for 3 weeks. It's better at 21 than 24 million. Obviously, I'd like it to begin to go down. These numbers, this number and the prior number, this number here of first-time claims, and this one of continued claims, comes out every Thursday at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. Follow that number. Wall Street pays attention to this number because it comes out weekly, not monthly, so it's quite current. The unemployment numbers are monthly data coming out, and they're based on the week in the prior month with the 12th. So they're 3 weeks behind schedule, not behind schedule. They're 3 weeks late. This is much more contemporaneous data. I'd like to see this begin to go down. The problem is, when you lose 40 million jobs like you had here, if you add up all the height of all the bars, that's like 40 million jobs. It's a quarter of the labor force. You cannot lose that many jobs now, that many people dislocated, and have them all come back to their jobs. Some of these jobs flat out have disappeared. And as they've disappeared, this causes a real problem, right? You can't go to your old job. You gotta find a new one, you gotta learn new skills. It takes time, you gotta make new collections, look for a job. This delays everything. And the question is, how serious is that problem? No one exactly knows because we don't know how many firms are gonna go out of business, how many restaurants, hotels, motels, all those sorts of very leisure and hospitality type retail jobs are gonna go out of business. It's hard to know, but we know there's gonna be lots of dislocation. Now on top of that, you have this weird effect that I talked about earlier, about the government giving us more unemployment insurance. So every state gives you a weekly unemployment check. On top of that, the federal government said, look, we're going to give you extra money. We're going to give you an extra $600 a week on top of that. So you have the federal state money plus this big federal money, state money plus the big federal money. And many people are making more money unemployed than working. This is causing some depressed numbers in unemployment because people are saying, I don't want to work. So they don't work. They say, I'm afraid of getting coronavirus, and they can still qualify for their benefits. The benefits end in 6 weeks or 5 weeks, end of July. So this problem will go away, and Congress isn't going to be as generous going forward. They're going to do something. They have to do something. You need the money. But we'll see what they end up coming through. And you can see different states. And New Hampshire happens to be like the most generous state in the whole country. You, Massachusetts, California. So in your case, it affects you less because your benefits are already so big. But generally speaking, this is hampering a little bit the labor market improvement. Now, let's talk about inflation briefly. To be really brief, there isn't any inflation. There is no inflation. And there's not going to be any inflation in the near future. Like 3 or 4 years from now, I don't know what it'll be. Who knows? Maybe the North Koreans nuke us or something. I can't think that far in advance. It's just too far. You know, but in the short run, next year or two, no way is there inflation. We're going to have too much slack in every single market. Labor markets are going to have slack. Manufacturing is going to have slack, excess capacity in plant and equipment. I mean, there's no way we're going to need it. Here's an example of inflation. This is the Fed's favorite measure of inflation, personal consumption, expenditure inflation, not CPI, a little bit. Do you see inflation on the very far right? These blue and red lines are going down like that. Now they're going down. The blue ones, overall headline inflation, includes food and energy. And energy prices, as we know, have been collapsing. Food, not so much. Energy prices have stopped falling, so that's going to end. Red is core, excluding food and energy, which bounce around a lot. If you look at the red, that gives you a better idea of the economic inflationary mojo of our economy. It's going down. There's no inflation coming on in the near future. Interest rates are going to stay super low. I promise you that. I promise you that. So what happens to rates? Absolutely friggin' nothing. Rates stay low because growth is low. This helps. This helps. Mortgage rates. This helps housing. So housing is going to be a big benefit. Is a beneficiary and will continue to be a beneficiary of the low inflation rate environment. Moreover, the people who've lost jobs, by and large, are entry-level workers. They're not people who are buying houses. They're renters. So the demographic effects of coronavirus, while being profoundly negative, don't affect housing all that much. And rates are super low. And there's pent-up demand. And people want to buy a different house because they lived in their house locked up for 2 months, and suddenly they realize the house that they had isn't the house that they want. So you have 1,001 reasons why you want to get a new house. That's why housing sales are they're going to be V-shaped. We're going to look at that in a couple of seconds. But quickly, a detour into politics. Can't help it. I can't help it. Elections are in 5 months. So really, really quickly here, I'm going to show you 3 graphs. Congress, the House, the Senate, the presidency. And you're going to get my opinions here. The House stays Democratic, no ands, ifs, or buts. The Republicans would literally have to pull off a miracle to regain the House. They have to keep all the seats they have and pick up some Democratic seats too. This is an impossible task. Don't even waste your time thinking about it. In terms of the Senate, it is a nail-bitingly close race. There are 4 seats that are really close right now. There's Maine, where there's Susan Collins. There's North Carolina, Tom Tillis. There's Colorado, Cory Gardner, and there's in Arizona, somebody else, another Republican. Those are the 4 closest Republican seats. They're all up for grabs. If the Republicans keep 1, they keep the Senate. If they lose all 4, it's tied 50-50. And there's even talk of Democrats being competitive in Georgia for the first time. They were almost close last time, but even closer this time because of demographic changes. And who knows about the social unrest? That's the other thing. We don't need a lot of social unrest. We can have all the protests we want, and that's great. After the murder of George Floyd, you don't need arson. That's the big thing that scares me. This delays how corporate openings and household open. People coming out, that would be bad for the economy. Protests are great. We need to solve racial injustice. We need everybody to be able to exceed, to do whatever the most they can do with their life and go to school and get educated and get a good job and not be discriminated against by their religion or color of their skin, for sure. All economists are like everybody else. We'd like to see that happen soon. Now, in terms of the presidency, if I gave this speech 2.5 months ago on April 1st, I would have said Donald Trump was an easy winner going away in the election. 2.5 months later, I will now tell you Joe Biden's going to win easy and going away. His lead over Trump is widening among independents, it's widening among women, it's widening among the elderly. Now, there's a long time to go. As I said, 2.5 months ago, he was in the driver's seat. Lots of things can happen. And the election isn't until November 3rd or 4th or whatever it is. But we had a sea change in expectations on what's going to happen with the election. Right now, Joe Biden's in that. He could make a ton of mistakes. Trump will turn around. I'm not saying this is me. Let's talk about housing. Housing has been very, very, very lucky. Largely like automobiles, but even more lucky. So this is first-time mortgage app. So you're buying a house. This is not a refi. It's a first-time mortgage app. You can't see it in this graph, but you see in the very far right, it goes way down and then goes right back up again, right? Very far right. If I retrigger this graph and show it you in a different way, you will see what I mean. Look at the blue line. The blue line is first-time mortgage apps. So they completely crater into early April, late March, early April, they crater. And then they do this tremendous recovery. At their worst, first-time mortgage apps were down 35% year over year. Now they're up like 18% year over year. This is over a 50 percentage point improvement because people want a house. The house they have is no good. They want to live in the suburbs because they want to be safer. They want to live near their family. Oh, maybe they want to live away from their family because they hate their family. That's why booze sales, drug sales, gun sales, ammo sales are all up. But I digress, right? So this is a staggering improvement, and these become sales 3 months later. You apply for the mortgage, you write the contract, and then 2 months later it comes to the table. So this is a leading indicator, like by 3 months, right? This is the slowness of the housing transaction process. Now, this is actual sales through April, right? This is April, so we don't have May sales, and we're going to get them in about 2 weeks. We don't have it. They may go down in May because April contracts will not be out of the system in May, right? So it takes you buy that, you contract in early April, come to the table in May. When we get May sales, that's going to include all those crappy April data and even some of the late March data. So May is going to be bad, but by the end of May, we should have all that bad stuff behind us. And June sales should be good, and if not June, certainly July, right? So we're now in the recovery phase. You guys should be experiencing tremendous demand for housing right now and signing lots of contracts that hit the table in 30 days, 60 days, whatever it is, right? The only reason they're going to look bad in May is the artifact of having the crappy April still in there. But other than that, we're fine. And there's no friggin' inventory. Inventory's at a friggin' historic low. Look at this graph on the far right. NAR data going back, this is 20 years, right? You can see it's below 1.5 million on the very far right, very far where my cursor is. These are all-time lows in total inventory available, right? So there's nothing to buy. People want a job. People want a house. They've held on to their job because most homeowners are not entry-level workers, right? Who are losing their job. So we're okay. On the construction side, this is housing starts. For a couple of months in December, Jan, and Feb, December 19 and Jan and Feb 2020, where my cursor is, they were great. They were great. And then because they had good weather in the upper Midwest, Minneapolis all the way west, almost to Oregon, we had great weather, Washington. And that's what drove some of these numbers up. And then they fell down precipitously. But there's no inventory, remember. So builders now aren't building. They were just about to start building again, and now, we can't. No money, it's hard to get it, banks are pulling back, whatever. They're going to come back soon. But even a month or two decline in construction activity is causing a problem because there's already a signal lack of inventory. So if you look at sales of new homes, they declined a little bit, but not much. And their decline is done. They went down in March, they went up a little bit in April, and I think they continue to rise. So they are chronologically, I would say, a month or two ahead of existing sales. Not because they're doing a whole lot better, because their sales in April are sales in April. Pending sales in April for housing, existing housing, become sales in June. So we're just fundamentally 2 months behind because of calendar issues. There's nothing fundamentally better about one market than the other. But they're both showing really terrific numbers. They really are showing, in both cases, really a V-shaped recovery, and it's very solid, right? There's no real problem in these sectors. And again, in new construction, there's also no inventory. So builders don't build, there's no inventory of new homes. Therefore, people don't want to sell their home now, and they don't want to invite the coronavirus into their homes on the hands of all these people looking at their house. So there's less inventory even than before, right? There's barely any inventory, existing inventory. There's no new inventory, there's no new construction, but there's big demand. So, because rates are super low too. This is really amazing. You look at home builders themselves, their optimism has returned. They aren't happy, but they're happier, and they'll be happier again when this data is refreshed in about a week, in a couple of days. I think later this week on Wednesday that we get this data, and then on Friday housing starts, or Thursday or something like that. In terms of prices, this is an important thing too. Prices have not declined. They could. a little bit, but not much, because of all these lack of supply, and because the prices keep going up every month in the last couple of months. People who thought they could get a cheap house back in April or May gave up. And now they're saying, okay, I need a house. I'm going to pay the market price. I can't lowball the person and get 20% and 30% off, because the sellers, they're not doing it. They're not selling. So because the prices aren't going down, that causes prices to go up even more and demand to rise even further. So almost everything now is working in the favor of home building and home sales. Now, the big fear here is how long it takes for the recovery really to hit. If unemployment remains profoundly high at, say, 9 or 10% for a year or two, eventually that will hurt the housing market. But as long as we see steady, solid improvement and unemployment declining pleasantly, we're probably out of the woods. But if we get hung up somewhere with high unemployment and we can't fix it, then we have a problem on our hands. But so far, there's no evidence. In terms of new home prices, they're kind of plateauing. Builders are offering some incentives to buy houses and so on. But housing is coming off pretty well. In terms of pending sales, this is the graph. This is also still old data, only April. It will get better in May, because April we were locked down the whole damn month. May we weren't locked down the whole month. Some states already opened up. In June, just about everybody opened up. So these numbers will all solidly improve. April was the worst month, no question about it. Now, some quick food for thought. Forbearance issues, they matter. We need to keep the people in forbearance in forbearance. We don't want their houses to come back on the market down the road in a year when the program ends. So Congress is going to have to continue extending some kind of protection here to these people and helping the mortgage servicers and however the system works here. But we don't want millions of homes coming back on the market. We learned our lesson back in 2008-9. We don't want banks owning homes. Banks don't want to own homes. We want people to stay in their homes and add the mortgage time to the end of the mortgage or whatever it is. But we don't want homes on the market. Also, as I mentioned earlier, so Congress has to come through. Coronavirus has to not return. A trade fight we don't need. And in terms of the murder of George Floyd, we need tons of protests, peaceful protests everywhere, fighting for racial justice and equality. But we don't need arson and violence. And most people are not doing it. It's a very small minority of maybe just potential rabble rousers, bad guys who are taking advantage of the situation. I hope I've given you food for thought. I've spoken for way too long. This is how to get a hold of me. And Lorraine, you mentioned my daily blog. Here's how to get it. You can go to my website, Econ70, and sign up there, or text the word, wait for it, Bowtie. 6 letters, not 2 words, 1 word together, Bowtie, to the 5-digit number 22828. You'll be prompted for an email address. You'll hear from me every day till you die. If you go to hell, you hear from me there too, because I am a dismal scientist. I hope I've given you food for thought. It's time for Q&A. Let's go. I hope I've given you, I'm optimistic, but I've got some concerns out there that are real. I think that's what I want you to think about. And housing, my gosh, it's incredibly fortunate the sector of the economy you're in. Unemployment in housing declined precipitously in May. It went skyrocketed in April, but it retraced half the way down in May. All these builders got the PPP money and they're building homes because they know they can sell them, because they're in the burbs and they're brand new and they've been untouched by human hands. And that's appealing all of a sudden. And they're bigger, and there's place for Junior to do homework, and there's place for my husband or wife to do exercise and have an office space to do webinars. These are suddenly very appealing thoughts that no one thought about 3 or 4 months ago.
Hey, Elliot, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Do you have any insight or comment about the demographics?
Demographics are running in your favor. There's no question about it. We had a number for a long time. The demographics were pushing multifamily construction as these millennials and so on were 23, 24, 25, 26, 28. But now those folks are aging into home ownership. So
right.
All else equal, that should help. Now, that generation's also been really clobbered because they had the last Great Recession of 2008-9, and now they're experiencing 10, 12 years later this one. So their home ownership rates may be somewhat reduced, all else equal. But that said, the demographics is still very, very powerful. Yeah. So it's a check mark in your favor as well.
Yes, it certainly feels that way. Do you have any sense on updated numbers about how many millennials are hitting the market every year or become home ownership eligible?
I should know that, and I don't. I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's okay. The last number I saw was a few years ago, and it was 1 million to 1.5 million. So
that sounds That sounds about right. Yeah. And it may be mildly depressed because their wealth has taken a hit, right? They entered the bad job market in nines. The youngest ones just entered the labor market 2 or 3 years ago. They may be adversely affected. Their wealth hasn't gone up so much. So there may be things. Now, you in New Hampshire have an extra bonus, right? You know that. Tax reform has made New Hampshire much more appealing. I mean, it's already the most appealing state in New England, of course. But now it's even more because you have no taxes there. So all the Massachusetts folks living in Boston, working in Boston may say, I'm going to move to Nashua or Manchester or Concord or something, whatever. They can still root for the Bruins. They can still root for the Red Sox.
Right.
There's no problem.
Yeah, that's an important part of your housing choice. Right?
Where the Red Sox are, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. Here's my prop. I was going to use this prop, but didn't use it. I'm from Montreal. I love the Canadiens. So I love the Red Sox. I love the Patriots. I love the Knicks. But I hate the Bruins, even though they're a great team. And they may have, hope they win the Stanley Cup for your sake, not mine.
Yeah. Well, we'll still eagerly read your blog and have you back nevertheless. So.
Thank you. I know. No one's perfect. Yeah.
All right. Well, just see what we got on chat here.
Yeah, we just had a couple of questions about the stock market and what are you seeing there?
So the stock market's an interesting thing. What's going on is the stock market's made, I don't know, today, this morning it was down a little bit just before I got on, made this remarkable recovery. And what's going on is there are some really big companies out there like Google or Alphabet, I guess, Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, Apple. These are really big companies. They have tons of cash, and they've not only weathered the COVID-19 storm, but they've actually improved. We're now using our phones more and using computers more and going to Amazon more, and they're benefiting from this. So these 5 or 6 big companies, Netflix, not quite as big, but still big, they're better off. So their stock price is going up. That's legitimate. Other companies like Neiman Marcus and JCPenney, and they're going belly up. So there's a big dichotomy, but these big companies, their market cap is like 20 or 25% of the stock market or something. Just $5 trillion in these 4 or 5 companies. For the NASDAQ, that's immensely huge, and that's why NASDAQ is going up and it's pulling the S&P with it. The Dow Jones is performing much more poorly because it's industrials, they're older firms, they aren't doing as well. But and the market also is thinking, look, what's my alternative? I can buy stock and hope for a decent return, or buy a bond, 10-year bond paying what? 0.7 percentage point? Are you kidding me? So there's the acronym TINA. There is no alternative. You got nowhere else to put your money. So you put it in the stock market. And those big companies are doing well. Unlike in Europe, where they don't have any of these successful big companies. They don't have any high-tech companies. They have Siemens and Alcatel or whatever, these old worthless, no good manufacturing concerns that aren't, I'm kidding, but you get my point. So there's a reason why our market's doing better. Has it gotten ahead of itself? I think it has. But there's some real fundamentals driving why these 5 or 6 big, solid, strong tech companies are doing well and pulling us all with it.
Elliot, do you see, just start to wind down here. Do you see more manufacturing being onshored back to North America?
A little bit. I don't see this as being a major, I think they may be de-shoring from China rather than onshoring to the US. It may go to Mexico, it may go to India, Vietnam. It depends how welcoming these countries are. And they aren't as big. I mean, China's almost 1.5 billion people. Mexico's 100 million. I mean, they can't absorb the jobs. Vietnam's, again, 90 million or something. These are tiny countries by comparison, even though they're objectively very large. And I think companies are going to say, we don't want to have a single source supplier for anything anymore. That's going to cost money. So on one hand, some jobs may come back. This will depress GDP growth because it will be less efficient than it is now, but it will prevent the calamity from happening like it has now, where you're dependent on one country. So yeah, there'll be some, but it only can be the high end, remember, because our wages are much too high here. We cannot manufacture spoons. Right. That's something that a low wage country will do. So some will come back at the high end and some will go elsewhere, I think is more likely.
Got it. All righty. Lorraine, do you want to close us up?
Yeah, we haven't seen any more questions come in the chats. I'm sorry, we just got one. Can you comment on regular SBA loans, not PPE?
I honestly don't know enough about it to talk about it. I'm really sorry. I hate to admit that I'm ignorant about something, but occasionally it happens. I just don't know.
That is hard to believe. given the fire hose you just got us
But
drink
I wish
out of.
I knew enough. I'm not an SBA guy. It's just the PPP was the new program, and that's what I know about a little bit. Sorry,
Awesome.
I apologize.
We had some people chatting in that they could listen all day, so we really, really appreciate you
Hello.
spending some time with us.
Bring me back in a month or 2 or 3 or a year or 2 or 3 or something, and
Yeah.
we'll continue the conversation. But thank
Awesome.
you. Sign up for my blog. It's been a real pleasure. It really has been.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Elliot.
Thank you, Team Mazziello and Chris and Lorraine and everybody. Thank you. Be well.
Great.
Stay safe.
Yeah. Be safe. Thank you.